Teachers, professors of Reddit, what's the worst thing you have ever had a student unironically turn in? As a universitate, I had the joy of marking an in-class essay that started out as a normal one, but turned into pages of rap lyrics. It was all written out and structured so that if you didn't read the words, it looked like a proper essay. Another favorite was a student who just wrote no as their essay. The entire test was an essay, so all they turned in was one word. And no, it wasn't a witty answer to the question. And finally, I marked a test that was covered in red ink drawings of middle fingers, and this class is stupid. The funny part was they did okay on the test. Last kid sounds like the greaser punk from Shawshank Redemption trying to get his GED. I used to teach computer science in university. I had a number of code submissions where the student just wrote pseudocode. If you aren't familiar with programming, think literally writing something like add 2 and 2 together, then show the result. I think they had someone else try and help them, so they put step-by-step instructions in comments, then tried to just uncomment that and turn it in. Worse, one student I had actually said it worked on their machine. No, Jared. No, it did not. You probably just forgot the .py extension for the file. For the first major research project in college, I had to work with a randomly assigned student. She didn't participate in any of the data collection or even really understand the protocol we were using. But the icing on the cake was that she word for word plagiarized her section of our paper from the example our professor had given us, which was an article he had written. No surprise, he noticed. I had a kid turn in a Wikipedia article as a research paper. He wrote the intro and conclusion, but the rest of it still had footnote numbers and, somehow, a slightly shaded background. These people doing a 30-minute group presentation copy-pasted all their slides. You could tell because they had that grey background highlight on all the text and a mess of different fonts within the same slides. It also ended up being like 5 minutes instead of 30, so they didn't even copy-paste enough. An essay completed by his mom, who had done his written work for years, according to other teachers. At the parent-teacher interview, I told her I believe the essay was likely plagiarized as it did not match the level of work that her son completed in class. However, the essay itself was so poorly written that there was no point in pursuing a lower grade than he had already received. Her husband gave her an all-knowing side-eye grimace and she turned bright red. Kid went on to fail my exam with a 4%. It takes a lot of freaking work to get a 4% on an exam. Savage. I like your style. Had a student, while student teaching, I suspected of having a parent over help with the work, but never had to escalate it that far. Students literally plagiarized about 2 pages of a book I had written, as if I wouldn't notice. One of my friends in grad school had sold her papers to an online paper mill as an undergrad to make ends meet. One of her students in grad school bought one of her papers and turned it into her. During student presentations once, I had to stop class to pull aside one of the students for mocking a dyslexic classmate for his spelling errors. Then, my random name picker selected rude student next. He plugs his computer into the projector and starts presenting, and the rest of the class immediately starts snickering. Rude student hadn't done the assignment at all. He had copied another student's file off of the lab computers and hoped I wouldn't notice. He had copied his dyslexic classmate's file, spelling errors and all. He got a 0 and a discipline referral. This is on me and I know it. I teach 6th grade and had taught about citing sources but not about reliability. Had a student turn in a science paper whose entire source list was Phineas and Ferb episodes. My favorite was a research paper about Black Panthers, literal, 4-legged Black Panthers, for a paper about the color of water, a book that touches on family, education, and race, including the Black Panther political group. Apparently the student did not read the book or pay much attention to the classroom discussions. I also especially like it when they copy and paste from different websites without changing the fonts. Native to the land of Wakanda. I'll always remember the time students had the assignment to write something creative. We'd covered poems, short stories, stuff like that. Even a diary or journal entry would have worked. It was a real softball of a homework assignment. A couple kids clearly phoned it in and that's annoying. But one kid decided to plagiarize Bob Marley lyrics as an original poem. Dude, you could have written 2 paragraphs about how you like that song. and we're all good. Now I have to drag you out in the hall because plagiarizing is a big deal and can get him in trouble with administration. That's over my head. Just felt bad all around, and I was a new teacher at the time and had never had to deal with it before. Seriously people, just half butt your homework or take the 0. If you don't want to do it, don't cheat. Once you cheat, stuff is out of my hands, and there's no way it's worth it on a dumb one-off assignment. I proofread a paper when I was a tutor where the author claimed that the song ABC by the Jackson 5 was educational. She argued that the whole purpose of the song was to teach children their ABCs and 123s purely because it had the letters ABC and numbers 123 in it. I made her listen to the song twice and tried to strongly convince her otherwise, but she kept insisting it was educational, so she turned it in that way. A student handed in an assignment for French class that he had used Google Translate for, except he made a mistake when selecting the language to translate from English. The assignment he handed in was in Finnish. Why for the professor? College kids being unable to distinguish between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans on a map quiz. Man, did you know Chicago was one of the original 13 colonies? Reminds me of 6th grade. We had a forced quiet reading time and teachers used that to grade homework. And the geography teacher in the middle just randomly slammed his table and started yelling about how could anyone, on a map of North and South America, think the Indian Ocean was there. I'm family and consumer science teacher. Home ec. I had a student staple together their sewing project. They had actually completed a beautifully constructed pencil pouch, 7th grade, but was too lazy to empty out the pencil pouch because they had already started using it. I give one homework assignment in my 8th grade course, make a meal at home or sign up to make one for a few teachers after school. This kid signs up to make one after school, gives me an ingredients list. It's just packs of ramen, no other ingredients. He promised it would be the best thing we ever would eat. I was grading anatomy papers once and a male college student mislabeled the T as a dong. I had someone else call the pectoralis major muscle that goes over the chest area the titimus major. That same kid also called the quadriceps the quadricicle. I had one male student mislabel appendix as the clitoris. So many good jokes came from this one. Also, I should point out that all of these were on accurate anatomical models, so these were especially bad mistakes. Titimus major had me dying. The students were asked to create a video for their final assignment talking about global warming, or something related to it. They were promised extra credit if they got a lot of people to watch the video. The idea behind this was to spread awareness and to incentivize high quality work. One student created a black screen video, put it on YouTube with a clickbait title, and spammed it around the internet. He ended up with enough extra credits to get an A in the class. He will probably be more successful because he knows how to market. I coach for academic decathlon, a test-taking extracurricular. I had one student that hadn't studied the regional test at all, marked all C, these are on Scantrans, and wrote his name as Animated's. Told him he's lucky it was me grading it, literally anyone else would have thrown his butt out. Man, I wish they had been a testing extracurricular activity when I was in school. I just couldn't get enough of those sweet tests. I had a student say something about how Jewish people wanted to end up in the Terezin concentration camp because it made them feel comfortable and nice. My English professor has a copy of a paper turned in by a student a few years back. All the professors got copies, saying how E.E. Cummings got his name because he said E before. Well, Cooming. No one was sure if the kid was serious, but apparently the professor was sad to have to fail the paper. E.E. Cummings in her face. Now that's poetry in motion. Not a teacher, but I remember my 9th grade English teacher was returning essays we had written. When she got to the student behind me, she handed his back with a post-it note attached that had a web address written on it. In front of the entire class, she looks at this kid and says, "This is the website you copied your entire essay from." Only time I ever enjoyed that class. A mostly blank final exam with a poem on the back about how they were worthless and a failure. Yep, I've turned in a blank exam once or twice during my college career. It's the most debilitating feeling one could ever feel, especially after studying for several days for it. My husband is a professor. He had a student would consistently turn in papers covered in coffee stains. The last straw was when the student turned in another coffee coated assignment with the pages all stuck together and kind of lumpy. On prying the pages apart, it was discovered a coffee stirrer had somehow gotten sandwiched in there. The assignment was returned, ungraded. I taught technical drawing. One of the kids was getting suspended for a week. He asked me for work he could take home, since he couldn't do work using the software at home, because he didn't have a computer. I gave him a stack of worksheets pertaining to the AutoCAD software and told him to take a book off the shelf. The guy came back later after his suspension was over and turned in some of the craziest worksheets I'd ever seen. I told him, not one of these answers is right. The kid got all upset. He said, they all came straight out of the book. Then he showed me the book. It was Norton's Anthology of English Literature. I had a student in a graduate physics course turn in all the printed solutions with his name on it. He had the audacity to ask for a B+ so he didn't get kicked out of his program, lol. On my high school physics final I just wrote down every formula I could think of. The teacher gave me 1 point per, which brought me to around 30%. With a curve, that was a solid B. Not a teacher, but once a teacher told me about a student plagiarizing Poe's The Raven. This gave me a flashback to 4th or 5th grade music class. We had some recital but I was going to miss it because I had a baseball game that night. Teacher said to make up the points I had to write a paper about a musician. Copy and pasted the entire Wikipedia page about Beethoven including citations and pictures. Teacher must not have cared because I got full points. I cringed just thinking about it. I once had a student who misspelled his own name. As an English teacher, I had a child turn in a creative writing piece that was pretty much the entire plot of Alien. When confronted with his plagiarism, he said he'd thought I wouldn't realize because it was a really old movie and women don't watch movies like that. Go in the other room, woman. The men are watching Aliens. Senior students were asked to submit a creative response to a prompt. The prompt was an image of a group of people collaborating over a map. I expected stories in the vein of treasure hunting, since we were reading short stories with that as the theme. One student turned in a 4-page creative essay about bestiality and gang violation because that's what they were plotting. Needless to say, he was sent to the counselor's office. We all have to admit that was a very creative response. Disturbing, but creative. During standardized testing, MCAS, classmate of mine was asked to write an essay on a piece of literature he read that talked about war. He made up a story called The Big War, and he wrote down a different classmate's name as the author. Surprisingly, he didn't get caught. A student was absent on the day a worksheet was due. I graded and returned the worksheets pretty quickly. When the student in question returned, she turned in another student's already graded worksheet. How, you might ask, did she hope to pull this off? She tore off the original student's name, wrote her own name elsewhere on the paper, and then used black ink to scribble over all the red ink on the worksheet, underlining, circles, X's, the grade, in hopes that I wouldn't notice I already graded it. Sadly, she was a dim enough bulb that the resultant 0 had negligible effect on her grade. Straight up pages long plagiarism from the internet always comes off as pretty stupid. Why does this keep happening? Are kids brain damaged? The kids are either that stupid, that lazy, or think that their teachers are that stupid. I had a student I was desperately trying not to fail who still owed me 2,000 word papers towards the end of the semester. I had a couple of conversations and multiple rounds of email with him. After a month plus of this, I received an email with the subject line, "Here are both papers," or words to that effect. I opened it and was confused because there were no attachments. Eventually, I figured out that he had typed the contents of the papers into the email. Not standard practice, but I would have let it go out of mercy. The reason it took me so long to figure this out was that I literally skimmed over the contents of each paper thinking they were part of the email header and indented text in the reply. He had written one sentence for each paper. The 2 sentences were 14 words. In total, that person is not in college anymore. I've told this one before in a similar thread, but I was a TA in a computer science lab. Had a student turn in a program that wouldn't compile. Why? Because when they copied and pasted the program, they also included the email header at the top, so they accidentally ratted out themselves. 2 other students the program was emailed to, and the guy who sent it to them. The thing was, I was there to give the students any help they needed. I would have helped them line by line. Ah well. In high school the administration came up with some stupid senior assignment and forced all 12th grade English teachers to assign it. My teacher thought it was dumb too, so he gave everyone an A. Well, everyone but me, because I didn't do it. A week after it was due he was like, just turn something in, so I did less than 10% of it and turned it in. He gave me a B+. I am a Spanish teacher and one kid was supposed to write a large paragraph describing his school schedule. He turned in one sentence that was written in English. Not a teacher, but a girl I knew in high school had to do a report on the framers of the Constitution. Came back with a research paper on farmers of the Constitution. Literally wrote about farming in that time period. Seems like farmers were a harder subject than framers. If you really did research, I hope she didn't fail immediately. I'm an earth science teacher. Last year, I assigned a project about careers in earth science. It was a pretty simple project where they had to make a PowerPoint or brochure about a career with information like salary, what education is required, what does a typical day look like, etc. A few kids did earth science teacher and most did a pretty good job with it, except Tony. First, he said that the hours that a science teacher works was 2 PM to 8 PM. I have no idea why he even put that, considering he goes to school and knows what time teachers work. He said the salary was $7,000 a year. And my favorite, he said, to be honest, a science teacher has it pretty easy. They just show movies all day and talk about science. I showed one movie the entire year and it was right before Christmas break. I pulled him aside the next day and said, Tony, let's talk about your presentation. He was like, it was great, right? And I just said no, it was terrible. Seriously? What were you thinking? He went on to explain that he completely forgot it was due until 10 PM the night before and bullshitted the whole thing, which I can believe, but even so, it's the one job on the list where he sees someone in that career every day. How could he possibly be so wrong? I also had a girl do marine biologist for the same project and she sent me slides about different branches of marine science and some basic information about it. It did not match what I asked for at all and even included discussion questions at the end. This was not something that was getting presented in class. I googled some of the info and quickly found the same exact PowerPoint that was used for a college intro to marine biology class. It wasn't even about the career. Not sure how she thought she was going to get away with that. Copied papers with the advertisements still in them. Plagiarized paper and parents said so. I don't see the big deal. A plagiarized and wiki article, including the citation needed link. My ex-wife received a research paper 100% copy and paste from the internet, including all the underlined hyperlinks, and claimed it was all original, even though she found the original website and presented it to the student. He claimed his computer was hacked and someone posted his essay to the site and was highly offended to the accusation. I was a student here, but sophomore year of high school I took AP World History, and at the end of the year, on the AP exam, there was an essay question asking you to detail some great migration in history, like the Irish to America because of the famine or slavery, etc, etc. Now, the question did not give those examples and I left it for last, and it did not state human migrations. When I got to it I had 15 minutes left and drew a complete mental blank. I couldn't think of anything. So I wrote a 2-page essay about bird migrations and how they flew south for the winter or whatever. A lot of it was BS because I didn't know anything really about bird migration. After the exam I told my teacher and she whacked me over the head. She had a jovial relationship with all of us. Everyone loved her. Results came and I still passed with a 3. I assume I got a 0 on that essay, but secretly hope the grader had a sense of humor. Absolute madload in art class turned in everything Sonic the Hedgehog. Final project we had to do a stained glass for a church, Catholic school, and he literally painted Sonic on the cross while Tails knelt and wept. The best part was the teacher tried to fail him, but the principal got the teacher to pass him, and the comment sheet at end of year said unhealthy obsession with Sonic. I used to be a special education teacher. I told the student to sign here after the IEP meeting. After the student and parent left, I gathered the papers. He literally signed here. Student had an IQ of low 80s and was not aware of such things being funny. He tried his best. I was tutoring in a master's degree, capstone subject that students complete at the end of the degree to graduate. International student of mine submitted a paper that was filled with photos of cats as part of the assignment. I had a student turn in a paper on Jim Crow laws that used the N-word several times. I had to explain why that word wasn't appropriate for a school paper. Florists of Reddit, what's the saddest thing you've ever had to write on those little message cards? The florist I work at prints the cards and we don't have to handwrite them. The sympathy cards are always sad, but the worst one I've read was something along the lines of "I'm so sorry for the loss of your brother so soon after the loss of your parents. I upgraded that arrangement a bit and I know it wouldn't make the situation any better, but I wanted to make sure the flowers they received were extra nice." The florist didn't write it. My grandfather did. "Happy anniversary. I'll always love you. Pet name." It was delivered on their 40th anniversary, 5 months after he had passed from colon cancer. He had his son, my uncle, get the card and he wrote it a week before he passed. My uncle then saved it and sent it with the flowers my grandfather had ordered for her. We found the card again when she passed away. She had kept it stashed in one of his old cigar boxes with a stack of other love notes he'd sent her through the years, most when he was overseas in World War II. My mom was a floral arrangement specialist at Kroger. A young woman came in asking for lilies and rosebuds with baby's breath. My mom put it together for her and asked what she wanted on the card. The woman replied, "To Lily, the breath of your baby shall forever bloom, in our hearts and yours." She told my mom her sister's daughter died of SIDS the day before. Our goalkeeper hung himself when he was 14. His father was one of the biggest florists with several shops all around the city. I've never seen a grave like his since. It was practically a garden. Every card read "For my son, I'm sorry," and then finished with another confession. Apparently he had neglected him after his wife died and tried to keep the business running. Not necessarily sad, but weird. After my dad's funeral we were looking at the various arrangements and the cards. A rather lovely one came from my dad's old boss. Nice, except he supposedly had died 3-4 years earlier. He went off the grid. Nobody heard from him. Eventually everyone in the business said he died. Never did see him. He should have written on the card, "P.S. I know it isn't really relevant to you anymore, but I am not dead." A man paid for flowers to be left at his wife's graveside once a month. Always wrote "I love and miss you" on it. Not the saddest thing to write, but just the idea of it. He always called to make sure we didn't forget, too. Also, having to do the flower arrangements for a friend I was just with the night before. Imagine finding out they died because someone was ordering flowers for their parents. I was a florist for about 5 years, and though I don't specifically remember any of the card messages, my worst day was when a local 7 or 8-year-old girl passed away after she was thrown from a horse. The neighborhood she lived in was right across the street from my shop, and one day before the funeral all the little girl's friends came in with their parents to pick things out for the funeral. It was heart-wrenching with each of these little girls and boys choosing flowers and saying what they wanted on the card. I'll never forget it. Different kind of sad, I guess, and the card itself was actually fine. Just the usual sappy little love note, signed by your secret admirer. The guy came to one of the shops and paid in cash. When the delivery came, the girl at the door panicked and started crying, demanding to know who it was from. Our drivers don't have that information, but stayed with her and tried to console her while the main shop was called and payment info was checked. Since he didn't use a card, we couldn't have told her even in a best case scenario. We had no info at all. She didn't want the flowers, so the driver brought them back. Eventually, the shop was contacted and asked to go through their security camera footage, because the girl evidently had a long-term stalker who she had moved to get away from. Don't know the end of the story, unfortunately, but I always was relieved when the secret admirers I dealt with paid with a credit card. My grandmother was a florist for many years. I used to go to the greenhouse with her all the time and watch her make these amazing flower arrangements. One day, I was visiting and she's just got done making a stunning bouquet with a small card in the center. The card read, "Eric, I'm sorry to have heard of your recent tragedy. You'll forever be missed by us all. Turns out Eric was just getting married. The arrangement was from his drinking buddies. Not a florist, but this most recent Memorial Day was the first one without my grandpa. It has been a family tradition to all go to the cemetery and lay flowers on the great-grandparents' graves, and this was the first one where grandpa would be joining that list. The flower selection at the store was pretty picked over, which is what happens when you wait to buy flowers the morning of, but with my floral design skills I picked up practicing arranging flowers for my upcoming wedding. I was confident I could arrange something pretty for all 3 headstones. At the cemetery I am arranging the various bouquets. Mom, Grandma and the aunts are losing it with grief until they notice this little old man 2 rows behind us. He looked so sad. He was kneeling at a grave, tearing up as he tried to stick a rose in the little flower jar often installed with a headstone. We learned that his wife of 60 years died a few days before Grandpa and that he wanted to keep the roses he brought fresh looking and watered. He told us that he wasn't good at that sort of thing and he doesn't want to embarrass the memory of his wife by having dead flowers on her grave. He didn't have any family in town and it was getting harder for him to do things. His wife had been why he got up every morning, and he was afraid that when he died, no one would put flowers on her grave. We just couldn't let that happen. Not on that day. So the aunts and my grandma talked to him about his wife while they watched my mom and I created a 4th little bundle of flowers to add to his failing roses. I recut the stems, added some of our flower food to the water and created a pretty little bouquet for his wife's headstone. We promised that we would look over his wife's grave too, and make sure that her flowers always looked pretty. Now every Memorial Day, we will honor my great-grandparents, Grandpa and the woman 2 rows over. My shop used to do funerals. We had a couple come in once and they just did not seem all there. Taking the order was very difficult, but eventually we got them sorted out with a nice little spray blue arrangement for a casket and some blue and white standing arrangements. Turns out they had just lost their 4-year-old son and were actually fresh in our shop from the funeral home where they choose the casket. We got orders the rest of the week from their friends and relatives with cards like "Heartbroken for you" and "He was the sweetest boy." Having seen them as they went through it made every card hard to write. We had a standing order for a weekly bouquet. This was an exclusive shop in an affluent area, and the gentleman clearly had enough money to send something showy to his beloved wife on a regular basis. What struck me was that he would personally call in a new poem with each order, and these weren't Shakespeare quotes by any means. All were summoned from the depths of his own creativity. I was tasked with painstakingly transcribing his weekly poem onto the card. They had been married for a long time, and you can imagine how these poems would have devolved into Cornville. Yet, he never missed a single one. While I was there, we all marveled at how he always took the time from running his large company to write a love-struck message to his wife every week. He never had a secretary call in the order. I was always touched to take the call from that old guy. Then one day, a woman called in with the poem. It was quite a bit different, perhaps lifted from a Hallmark card. As I filled out the order form, she explained that her father had experienced a debilitating stroke, and she would be providing the poetry from that point forward. The deliveries stopped shortly thereafter. Worked for a wedding event florist. We had a retirement party planned. The guy built the company from scratch, turned it into this regional multi-million-dollar enterprise. After 50 years of the company, he was retiring and setting his son as CEO. He was going to spend the rest of his life with his wife, 3 kids and 16 grandkids. Had a yacht he was going to sail to the Caribbean. He had it all planned out, was so happy with what he built but was ready to finally care for himself. Night before the retirement party, he was driving home from dinner with his son and was hit by a drunk driver. Both him and his son, the one taking over the company, perished. Drunk driver survived. I got the call from the event venue, got all the details. The $27K of flowers and decorations all went to waste. We filled the church with beautiful arrangements for the funeral, however. Found out a few years later that the guy's daughter was getting married and used my old boss, the florist, for her wedding. Turns out her mother ended up killing herself 9 months after her husband's death. They say she went into a deep depression after his death. She truly loved the guy and looked forward to spending the rest of their lives together. Well, not what was written but the bad timing of it. My brother has always been a sarcastic and funny kind of guy. He had a friend from church who was hospitalized due to some lifelong health complications. The guy has been hospitalized a lot his life and it was expected he'll be out in no time. He sent flowers basically saying, I bet you a $100 you'll come out of this fine and we can go get high and hammered with the money. The flowers arrived 2 days after he died. I was a trainee florist when I was 17. The saddest one I had was a phone order from a gentleman who wanted a bouquet of flowers with the note, sorry I ruined your life, to his ex-lover. Not a florist, but my mom was working at the same desk job for 10 years. 9 years in a row she got Valentine's flowers from my dad, who worked at the same place in a different department. On Valentine's Day, he was a custodian, so he would show up, filthy, with a bouquet screaming, where's my lady? And every year my mom and her co-workers got a great kick out of it, until they got divorced and she didn't get flowers that last year. The whole job was quiet and concerned. I brought her flowers instead with my little sister after school, 17 and 13 years old at the time. The whole job was crying. She quit a few weeks later. I am not a florist, but a few years ago on the day before his mom's birthday, my friend ordered her flowers. On the card he wrote something along the lines of, happy birthday, Mom. I'll love you always. And he died in the middle of the night. The next day, in the middle of her morning, someone came and delivered her those flowers. I know that there have already been a number of responses from non-florists, but I have one. There was a lady who was my grandmother's best friend for almost 50 years. Eventually my grandmother moved to a different state and they both eventually developed mobility issues and were not able to travel very much. But they still very regularly called each other on the phone and talked for hours. My grandmother's friend eventually died due to a number of complications, and I went to my grandmother's house soon after. She sent an order to a florist shop back in New York and asked for a note to be attached that said, I know that you always loved these flowers but could never have them because you were allergic. But I'm sending them to you now because I don't think it will bother you anymore. My grandmother had been crying for the death of her friend, but she laughed when she talked about the card later and said that she only wrote it because she knew her friend would have laughed had she seen it. I guess the circumstances for the card were sad, but the card itself was actually kind of funny. My grandmother died a few years later, but I'll always remember that aspect of the relationship between her and her friend. I was working for a florist and it was around Father's Day. Someone ordered flowers and I was instructed to write, Dad, thanks for keeping the abuse physical, on the card. Hopefully that family just has a dark sense of humor. I'm not a florist but I have one. My best friend and, basically, my brother, Mike, killed himself on the 4th of July 2005. Suicide note was left. Me and his grandmother found him. The funeral was intense. Tons of friends and family. I never left Mickey's side. It wasn't a time to catch up with old friends like most were doing. It was my final time spent with the closest person to me. A few days later, a bouquet of Mickey's favorite flowers, daffodils, popped up. I opened the little envelope. It was a note from Mikey, a PS. To his suicide note for me. It said, thank you my brother for doing all you could. You are the sole reason I made it this far. We both need to know you did all you could but I was not built for this world. But you were. Keep shining your light, my brother. Until the next time we meet, I love you. Mikey. I have the dried flowers and the note in its own portable safe. Every 4th of July, I take it out and read it. I have sent many bouquets to friends and family members I've lost. I have received plenty as well. In my lifestyle, we lose folks regularly. But that note was the single most powerful, painful, enjoyable, and humbling message I have ever received. I once had to send an arrangement and card to a woman at her work. The order was placed by her and was for the 1-year anniversary of her miscarriage. She specifically requested that we not reveal the sender if anyone called in to ask. The card was intentionally left with no sender, so the woman got the arrangement she sent herself, called us to ask who it was from, and we had to tell her I'm sorry, the sender has asked to remain anonymous, even though the previous night she had called herself to order it. Absolutely heartbreaking. Not a florist, but I once had flowers delivered to my office and the card said, I know I will never see you again but I wanted to thank you for changing my life. I have no idea who they were from. My brother died of an extremely rare disease when he was 7 years old. I was 2 at the time. About a year or two ago I came across a memo my dad wrote for the expat community to inform people of the loss. We were living in Tanzania at the time. The part that hit me the most was, a life, no matter how short, is a lifetime. I helped a cute and quiet boy and his father make an arrangement and they had happy birthday, mommy on the card. I told the boy, I bet your mommy will love this. Give her a hug with it, too. The boy teared up and said he didn't think he could make his hug reach heaven and he hoped she could see the flowers on her grave. Dad looked wrecked. I still feel awful. I ran a gift shop at a hospital. I got an order for a very elaborate bouquet. I asked what they wanted the message to say, which followed with, your loss is heaven's gain. It was delivered to maternity. My mom once sent me flowers with a card that said hope this isn't a nail in the coffin. Why, you might ask? Because even though my mom ordered a bouquet with no roses, the last time there were roses in the bouquet, I'm allergic to roses. Turns out the next bouquet still had roses. Both were supposed to be get well soon flowers after a series of surgeries I was having. The second time she called to complain because her order said on it no roses, but the place essentially said they did substitutions, because the bouquet she picked had like some super seasonal flower, at their discretion, and she could eat it. She did a Yelp review and they changed their tune by sending a new bouquet to me of freaking roses. After that we just had to laugh. I mean, I get the roses are expensive and that's what most people want, but really? Really? Dead customers write no reviews. This is more flower sadness related but I guess it belongs here. A girl in our work received flowers to her desk on Valentine's Day and was delighted, even though they didn't look very impressive. But she told me her boyfriend had been struggling financially recently because he was starting his own business, so this meant a lot to her. About half an hour later, a girl who sat 2 desks away received a much more impressive bouquet which got a lot of attention from the other women in the office. I saw the first girl watch all this, looking so sorrowful, before taking her flowers and hiding them under her desk. I had one that said, to honor your dying wish, I am putting this truth on a card for the world to see. I never loved you and resented you in my life. Now that you are gone, I feel a certain relief. There, I said it, Mom. Not sure if this counts but I was picking up flowers for GF of 2 year at the time. They gave me the wrong flowers but for the same girl. Turns out there was another guy in the picture trying to get her to date him. The look on the shop owner's face was priceless, especially since I had read what he had instructed them to write on the card at that point. Only here for a day, however his memory will live forever. I worked at a cemetery and god baby graves are the worst. I got used to digging and tending the big ones but I was reluctant to even clean the baby ones. So many people left little mementos and one had an Iron Man action figure standing next to it. Technically those should all go in the trash but we always left them there. Besides working for a bank for 3 years and college I've spent my entire 28 years in the flower industry. My mom has owned a shop since I was 2. My dad owned a greenhouse, etc. It's the family business. The saddest thing I can think of? There's too much. The mother whose 6-year-old dreamed of having a fairy tale wedding. When she died of cancer she gave her a fairy tale funeral. The families that take flowers to their infant's grave. It's between 20 years but they're still just a baby to them. Words on an enclosure card just can't describe sadness like I've seen. I've met with families to discuss funeral arrangements countless times. I've seen deceased people weekly, if not daily since I was a little boy. These people are friends and family, members of my small community. It takes an emotional toll. I'm sure to some florists it's just business but not to us. Dear Reddit people, what is a good healthy hobby to start for someone with depression? I'm not depressed but I do have pretty awful anxiety. I've found that knitting really helps. Particularly because if you don't concentrate on what you're doing, you'll probably frick it up. So you can't let your mind wander, which stops me dwelling on crap that makes me feel bad. In a sense, knitting is meditative for me. Plus, once you get even semi-good at it, people will think you're some kind of wizard. My wife suffers from depression and one of the things we do to help her when she's in a funk is jigsaw puzzles. It takes her mind off of things because she is focusing on finding the right pieces and feels really accomplished as we figure out more of the puzzle. Not depressed. but seconding that jigsaw puzzles are a great way to take your mind off the world. They are usually easy to find and buy, they require nothing but a flat hard surface, and they are a great time killer. I usually listen to podcasts while working on them as well. Shout out to our jigsaw puzzles as well. Cycling. I rented a bike in Vancouver's Stanley Park and brought back a lot of memories as a kid cycling. It gets you out and exercise always helps with depression. Can confirm. Currently depressed but purchased a bike a few weeks ago. Exploring on my bike leaves me feeling accomplished and motivated to do other things. Hiking. Being in nature relaxes your brain, unless you're in Australia, and it's not result oriented. When I was dealing with depression and practicing guitar, I'd usually end up more frustrated by my lack of apparent progress. On the one hand, I fought through it and ended up pretty decent, but a lot of the time I'd get too frustrated and just walk out of the house and into the woods. Eventually I realized how relaxing that was and I'd just start there. And at the end, I wouldn't be saying to myself you spent 6 hours on this and your Travis picking is still atrocious. I'd be thinking about all the cool stuff I saw in the woods. Bonus. You don't even have to build up motivation to do something because it feels at first like you're running away from your problems, but you're actually tricking your depression into giving you a relaxed way to work through it. Suck on that, depression. Oh, and birdwatching is a great hobby to pick up in parallel. Good luck. I got my wife a paint by numbers kit which she does to take her mind off depression. Cooking really helped me. It's easy to do great things and the compliments people give you can be a real booster. Photography. It forced me to find beauty. I also used it to force myself to interact with people through a project where I asked people if I could take their picture and requested basic biographical information. Finally getting an image right, really right, and having people like it is pretty rewarding. Really good suggestion. It lets me focus on my surroundings and makes me relax. Morning walks, they worked wonders for me, healthy and gave me time to think. Origami. It is inexpensive. All you need is paper, appropriate for heaps of different skill levels, and there are tons of tutorials online to keep you busy. Oh, and you can get an origami calendar and fold a new thing each day. I had one a few years back and it was very calming and enjoyable. Hey friend, as somebody currently taking the steps to work myself out of depression, maybe I could help with some tips. I started by walking my dog a different path. If you don't have a dog, just walk. Explore your neighborhood. If you can't muster up the energy, that's okay, don't beat yourself up about it. God knows some days I lay there all day trying to muster up the energy before deciding that it was too late. Do it the next day. Try to stop to smell the roses, as in, don't walk just to walk. Look around, listen to the birds, listen to how the wind blows through the trees and practice mindfulness. I always hated cooking too, but I found, and this might just be me, that the reason is I was cooking up some boring meals. Start doing something basic and interesting. I started making banana bread just to give to friends and family, and that's a good feeling. Start looking at interesting foods you can make yourself too. I also decided to work on my diet and exercise, but this time around I made it my aim to really nail how my psyche works so I can work around it. It's a difficult thing, but I found that waking up super early, 5:30 AM, and going straight to the gym is best for me. I walk fast pace on a treadmill and 2x 3 minutes jogging, just at this stage, then do some weight training. When you're done, it's early and you're up and energized. Don't nap, have breakfast, a shower, and then do something that interests you. I've also started Zentangles, which are great for mindfulness. You don't need any drawing experience to make something that looks great, and there's something very therapeutic about creating such an intricate image that takes so long. I'm at the beginning of my journey, and it is difficult, but it seems to be improving. Do not be discouraged if you didn't achieve something. Don't let the bully inside your head put you down. Just pick it back up tomorrow. Climbing. Like, climbing walls at gyms are awesome. You feel accomplished and exercised both mentally and physically. I started an aquarium and collecting tropical fish, little by little. It's a fascinating hobby, and fun to watch at night with the tank lights on and all the colors of the fish glowing. While recovering from depression, I've taken up hand sewing. The monotonous and lack of thinking that goes into it really relaxes me. Plus, I usually make plushies for my boyfriend, so I get great joy out of knowing how much he will love it. Even better, it keeps me from constantly being on the computer, something I did to extreme while depressed. Cross stitch. It's really easy to do, especially if you like older games, like NES or SNES stuff. You can get started for like less than $20, and when you do you can pick it up and put it down as you feel like you need. Depending on how you like your exercise, either weightlifting or running. Here's a sub that could be supportive and helpful. RED. Exercise out of depression. If you own any instrument, play it. I enjoy calm and relaxing music, so I picked up piano. If you have no idea how to play the instrument of choice, you can look up some tutorials on YouTube. This has helped me a lot through a period of time where I've been feeling down. Growing a small plant, if your climate is agreeable or you have the means to grow indoor plants, can help on two fronts. The tiny commitment to your plant, making sure it gets enough sun and water, helps you form some healthy habits, which definitely helps combat depression. Some research also suggests that having more natural greenery around helps improve mood and productivity. I find that this totally helps. I used to think growing plants was boring, but then I found some nurseries that sold really weird looking things and I got hooked. Having a plant is like having a pet that doesn't suffer if you neglect it. You get the nurturing experience of caring something, but if you have a bad period when you lose motivation, it's not like you've starved your dog. Art of any description. Seriously, drawing and painting can be so therapeutic. Just don't heap pressure on yourself to make your drawings look accurate. Just enjoy the process and the rest follows, if you ever need it to. I also find reading books about art or history to be very absorbing. Board games. Play with friends, family, and or become that guy who love board games. Join a club. Board games are awesome. I just have no friends to play them with. Start every day with some food even if you don't feel like eating. Protein especially. Eggs are fairly easy. Hard boil them the night before maybe. I like to make scrambled eggs mixed with mushrooms and spinach. I track terrorists on Twitter for fun. No, seriously, this helped me through some difficult spots in my life. So random, LMAO, but that's cool it helped you. Listening to audiobooks and going on long walks does it for me. I'm currently listening to the Worm audiobook project based on the web serial Worm, one of the best stories I have ever read in my opinion. It's a super long audiobook, work in progress though, and the story itself is longer than the entire word count of Harry Potter plus an extra Order of the Phoenix. I've begun to rant a little about Worm, but that's only because the story is so good and it's helped me get out of a seriously depressive rut in my life lately. I am fortunate enough to live near nice forests to walk through, and I think the walking is a big part of my little self-treatment. Something with animals. When you are contributing to the happiness of another who asks very little of you, with who the relationship is very simple and enjoyable, it's an awesome tool for pulling you out of depression, even if just in small bursts. Along with the usual suggestions, depending on your living situation, you could consider chickens. Showing and breeding is incredibly fun, plus you get eggs. Reptiles. Learning care and buying the setup are big steps, but reptiles are awesome bros. Generally docile, friendly, affectionate and quirky. Fish, perhaps something big like an Oscar. They aren't particularly demanding, cheap to keep and surprisingly fun to have. Insects, the ultimate quiet, laid-back pet. Things like stick insects or beetles are fascinating to watch. This is the reason I haven't thought of killing myself. I have 2 better in 5-gallon tanks and a leopard gecko. No one else in my family takes care of them except for me. I'll admit reptiles aren't that cuddly, but they're still great. I make obstacle courses for my Leo and add a treat at the end. She seems to like it. When I was depressed I used to go on long walks. Walks for hours and hours at a time. People have said this already, but once you get over the initial lack of confidence period, exercise does absolute wonders for your mental health. Changing my lifestyle and incorporating exercise and a good diet has been the only thing that dragged me out of wanting to kill myself. I still have down days, but nothing close to that level since I started working out. Drawing or adult coloring books, really relaxing and focusing. Not quite sure if it counts as a hobby, but caring for a pet. Now obviously, you should only get a pet if it makes sense as far as your work schedule, level of commitment, etc. But getting a pet can make a dramatic difference in your life. It's basically like bringing home a new best friend that's always there for you. Hey there, I take long walks while listening to audiobooks. I've hit a slump after paying off my student loans and then getting a decent job, and I got to the point to where I didn't have a concrete goal to wake up to, and every day I was like, so what now? Treat yourself to some decent headphones if you can, and just get lost with your thoughts while soaking in the pretty stuff. From my personal experience, as I do suffer from depression and anxiety at the same time, FML, I can say that every suggestion here works. Doing anything works. The problem is getting yourself to actually start doing it. What helped me is when I got a new phone and got back to geocaching and Ingress. If you're at least a little bit geeky, it gives you a reason to go out and walk around. It also takes you to very interesting places. And personally, I kinda got allergic to blue color. So sometimes I actually get off of the bus to walk for 20 minutes and bringing the area to the green side, especially if you are competitive. Good thing is that the game changes every few minutes, so it doesn't get boring over time. Honestly, something that really helped me was watching movies, shows, and playing video games. I understand the negative outlook on playing games all day, but if you are a person who does not want to leave your bed, even the small joy you get from playing Fallout 3 could be enough to get you out of bed. Heck, if you can play an online game, you might even meet some friends. That's a start for human contact, and you can feel safe within your house, without the social fears you may or may not have. Movies or shows can give you that small laugh or grin after an action scene. You might not move around much that day, but you laughed at Bill Murray in Moonrise Kingdom. Instead of crying or going to sleep to avoid feeling alive, you could enjoy something even if only for a small time. Just take baby steps. I scrolled down this thread quite a ways. I've seen cycling, rock climbing, scuba diving, jogging, animal therapy. As someone who suffers from deep depression and anxiety, I know a little about it. And when I'm wide awake at night and the anxiety is overwhelming, and the depression is like a 100-pound weight on my chest, not sure how rock climbing would help me. What does help me, and has probably literally saved my life? Gaming. Ready to go anytime. From deep emotional stories filled with drama, humor, romance, political intrigue, plot twists, and cliffhangers. Not to mention you get to be the baddest ladies man you've always wanted to be. Plus it's just fun running around blowing crap up and generally saving the day. You like shooters, RPGs, action adventure, puzzles, whatever. There are games for you. Lots of them. I like knitting. It's repetitive and relaxing, plus you can end up with some pretty sweet scarves. Scarves are really simple to knit and there are plenty of YouTube videos you can watch. Drawing. All you need is a pen, a piece of paper and no eraser. Just let it flow. Martial arts. Don't go to a franchise place or pay for belt place. Find somewhere authentic. Dojos are often very family-like and filled with every supportive people. It releases endorphins like any other exercise and it's very social. Dance classes can be much the same way. Teachers of Reddit. What's the saddest thing you've heard a student say? I work as a paraprofessional for kids in grades K-5, and I kind of hop around from kid to kid and help wherever I can. A lot of my one-on-one students are special education or have learning disabilities, so my approach to working with them is being open to their interests and talking to them in between work. You'd honestly be surprised how well this works, just letting them tell you about their day or fortnight or their weekend. Now I have had issues with stuff like this with a few kids, but the one that sticks out to me is this boy in my 5th grade class. He has both learning disabilities and issues with emotional processing. He's a very large kid at 10 years old, taller than I am. One day I come into the room to find him sullen and quiet and I ask him if he'd like to come out in the hallway and talk to me. At a bit of probing he told me that one of the kids in his class told him he should die, that nobody likes him. At one point he just whispers, "I just want someone to love me." It absolutely broke my heart. I struggle with feelings of not feeling loved myself, so I went told him, "You know I love you. Right, you're my friend and I always look forward to seeing you every day. We ended up taking a walk around the school just chatting to get his mind off things, and I told the social worker, ever since then he has been one of my best students. Yes, he still doesn't want to do his work, but he's always excited to see me, and one day when I came to class with a pulled muscle in my leg, he helped me walk to his seat and pulled out a chair for me. It's honestly one of the moments in my life where I feel I made a difference. Did a pretty standard scale drawing project where students measured and drew their bedrooms. A student drew squares along the walls, and when I asked what they were, he said they were the stove and refrigerator. Kid was sleeping in the kitchen. Ex-wife taught first grade in a school district known mostly for trailer park crime. At Christmas, she had her kids write stories about the best thing about the holidays. One extremely impoverished kid wrote that he was excited that Santa was going to let him pick out a single box of cold cereal that would be his and his alone, and he could pick from anything in the grocery store. Mum was dead but broke, working 2 jobs trying to make ends meet, and food stamps were the only way she could get her 3 kids a present. She played this up and the kids got excited about this. I was teaching media, journalism, podcasting, video editing, etc. to students in Southeast Europe who wanted to better utilize social media to show what was happening in their countries. Think Arab Spring. One of my students from Burma mentioned sleeping with her father. I pulled her aside to have her clarify. Her father sleeps in bed with her and her sister to make sure they aren't kidnapped overnight and sold into the prostitutes. Most sobering moment of my life. Dang, that is some heavy crap. My mom told me she didn't pack lunch because it was too expensive. Gave him my lunch. I remember when a girl in our class told the teacher it didn't matter if they learned it. She was going to be dead in a couple of years anyways. At the time I told my mom and she said the girl was probably just being dramatic, but the girl didn't come back after summer break. I had a student who was diagnosed with leukemia, went into remission, returned to school. Shortly after, his sister was diagnosed with skin cancer. A few weeks later, his brother was killed in URTA. One day he came to see me and just hung around my classroom door. I asked him if there was something he wanted, and to come in. He walked in, sat down and simply said, "I just wanted to stop. I don't know what I've done." Then he sobbed. We ended up crying together for the entire break. Absolutely heartbreaking. A second grader told me that he was feeling weird and tired that day because he didn't sleep much the night before because people were shooting each other on his street, and his dad went out to see what was happening and didn't come back until morning. He was so worried he hadn't slept at all. Another student told me he couldn't take his ADHD medicine because his mommy sold it for food. I keep seeing all of these stories about food. My school does a little thing that isn't much, but definitely helps. Every Friday, kids with a low income is sent home with a sack of food, usually including water, juice, a can of tuna, a small bag of chips, raisins, and other small non-perishables. It's a way a kid can have a meal or two if they otherwise aren't able to. If I don't get a 90 in your class, my dad won't let me see my mom. Duolingo bird eye roll. I was only sort of a teacher for 1 year. I worked at one of the national laboratories in the Bay Area, and as outreach we gave 2 science lessons each to all the schools in Oakland and Berkeley. On lesson 2 in one of the Oakland schools, from a 10-year-old girl who was clearly having trouble paying attention. "Sorry I wasn't here last time, my dad got shot." I was assisting another class of first graders, and when they were dismissed, one of the boys was slightly panicked and sticking to the wall. When I talked to him to figure out why, he informed me that his older brother had come to pick him up and that he was terrified. I called over the other teacher and we found out that his brother was physically abusive when they were alone together. Of course, in light of this information, we couldn't allow him to leave with his brother, so we called the mother and waited until she could pick him up. I informed the mother of what her son had told us and that was it, but I'll never forget how scared that little boy was. When I taught elementary school, I had a kindergarten kid that was always at the school. He'd show up super early and leave super late. He was in a before and after school program called MELC. They give the kids whose parents work breakfast and dinner. It was right before April break and I can't remember why, but I mentioned we were going to be off of school for a week. He started crying and said, "But miss, how am I going to eat if I'm not here?" I almost cried with him. His parents work all day long, reported it to the admin, but I don't think anything came of it. He might have stayed with other family for the week. He seemed fine when we came back. Many years ago I was teaching in a private school for children with emotional impairment and behavioral difficulties. I had a 6-year-old boy in class that had an upcoming court date about his violation by his mother's boyfriend. The violation happened when he was 4 years old. He looked at me with intensity and asked, "Do you think that the judge would let go into rapist's cell and beat him up? I am so much bigger now and I have been practicing. Oh, and after, could I live with you because my mom wants to live with him when he gets out of jail and I won't be able to live there anymore." My sister had a kid in kindergarten have a big breakdown seeing all the food getting thrown away after lunch on the first day. He had a bunch of siblings at home, and they were all hungry. It's the first time my sister cried at work. CPS was called and stuff happened. The young man had just received his scores on his ACT. They weren't good, and he felt his dream of being a police officer were over. The kid is 17. Just go his life rammed by a stupid butt test. It makes my blood boil how much stock we put into the dang test. He's a joy to have in class. Spent all of his lunches with me going over content he didn't understand. Is well liked. Works 40 hours a week. Is a productive member of society. And is just an overall good kid. And a dang test says he's not good enough. In my second year of teaching I had one of my 5th grade students approach me in almost tears and asked if I could talk to her outside our room one morning. I had a rough class that year, so at first I thought someone said something to her. Then she broke down and told me her stepfather had been physically abusing her for a while and threatened to kill her, her mom and her baby brother if she told. I don't know what made her finally ready to tell someone, but I was so happy she did. The worst part though was trying to get her help right then. I remember trying to get our social worker, but she was out of the building, so I ran to my principal's office. I couldn't get in because there was a group of teachers arguing and being catty to each other because one girl got a baby shower thrown by our superintendent and the other one didn't. So they had been saying things behind each other's backs and it was just dumb butt drama. I was furious. I had a child who was having serious issues and they were concerned about a baby shower and who was the favorite. I'll never forget that. Fast forward to last year and I went to the middle school and saw her. She ran up to me screaming and crying and gave me the biggest and best hug I have ever received. She's doing great now. I taught my high school students in China to write haiku, 575 syllables. I came across this one from an extremely pleasant and soft-spoken kid while going through what they handed in. Delete. My dad told to me, "Harry, now delete mum's number." Shut up. I will not. Harry, class 3A. The second line is 8 syllables. I am fully aware. This is what he wrote and came from his hair and mind, and that's what makes it special. Many of the haiku I got back that were full of mistakes were the most powerful, clever, hilarious. Also, you'd be surprised how hard it is to learn how to break down syllables coming from Chinese especially. It might help to know that 1. Each character in Chinese essentially boils down to one syllable when pronounced, but the way kids learn at a young age to form the sounds breaks them down into either 2 or 3 parts that string together in different ways. 2. In Chinese poetry, since each character is one sound and takes up an equal amount of space and rhythm, just the concept of words of different lengths having all sorts of variety and number of syllables throws them off from the start. 3. Harry had literally learned what a syllable was like 3 days before he wrote this. This made me laugh and now I feel rather bad for that boy, Harry. As a community college peer tutor, I've heard too many kids and adults tell me about their depression, anxiety, addiction, and bullying. For some reason one kid stuck with me. He told me about his autism and his love for writing movie scripts. He said, "I know they're not very good, so my dad always reads them and helps correct them." It was sad hearing him beat himself up about something he loved, but nice to hear that his dad always takes the time to go through long scripts with him often. Props to that dad for being there and encouraging his son. I was a secondary education major for most of college and worked at a bunch of schools nearby. At one middle school, there was a kid we'll call Jeremy, about 12 years old, black, family was pretty broke, smart kid, worked pretty hard and took good notes. He was never involved in any of the problems around the school and never got in trouble for anything more than missing an assignment or two. Good dude. We were talking about their plans for the future, and Jeremy mentioned he probably wouldn't be able to go to college, but that was okay. He'd try to find a job before leaving high school. And when I go to jail, I hope it'll only be for a few years so I can get back to work. Not if, when. With everything he'd seen in the world up to that point, it wasn't really a question for him. I'm sorry, I didn't take my meds today because mom sold them again. And is it okay if I stay in your room for lunch? We don't have any food in the house. I bought that kid bread, peanut butter, jelly and some snacks. And he made lunches and dinners for himself and his brother. I cried every night during that school year. He made lunches and dinners for himself and his brother really got to me. Thanks for looking out for these kids. I have two from the same open university in an economically depressed area. 1. With tears, can I please turn in my paper next week instead of next class because my brother just got convicted and they are asking for the death penalty. Poor kid. That's a heck of a lot to handle at 18. 2. This was an essay on the topic of why are you here. The student, an older woman in a freshman comp class, wrote that she'd had her kids at a young age, and now that they were grown, she wanted to show them that she could still make something of herself. And even though her husband told her that he would leave her if she went to college, she came anyway. Thank God it was a diagnostic essay, because how the heck would you grade that? I just wanted to cheer and hug her. And even though her husband told her that he would leave her if she went to college, she came anyway. Good lord, I'm so glad she ignored him. Hopefully things got better for her. Not me, but wife. A couple years ago a grade 3 kid whose birthday was coming up was saying how he didn't deserve a birthday, that he was a speck of dirt, that he was bad. It took a while, but my wife was able to figure out that when he was in grade 1 and at his birthday celebrations, his dad stabbed his mom. He had internalized this into somehow being his fault because it happened on his birthday. It was his fault that his dad was in jail and that his mom was so severely injured that she could no longer work. It was his fault that they had to move into a much smaller place. Really tough to hear. Kids should not have to deal with this crap. That's the thing with abuse. The child doesn't stop loving their parents, they stop loving themselves. Heard just last week from behavioral emotional support student. IA, me. Wow, that's a pretty good score. Great job. Student. Yeah, but I got % wrong. Mom's not gonna be happy about that. IA, but this is honestly a good score for you. It's over half. Student. I know, but whenever I tell her I got like 20 out of 30, my mom always says but you still got 10 wrong. And I'm like, screaming in my head, why can't you be happy for me for finally getting a good grade? IA. Heartbreaking. Well, if she won't say it, I will. This is an awesome score for you. I mean, this is a brand new concept the teacher just introduced today and you rocked out this score after only hearing it once. You did rockin' awesome. The little smile they gave at that, ugh, just killed me. This kind of stuff really fricks people up. My girlfriend had some really crappy parents a bit like this. She will get 95% in a test at university and she will beat herself up about getting the 5% wrong. I feel like I can hear her parents' voices when she does it. It's hard to convince people otherwise when it's been so ingrained from a young age. This happened to me and I know it killed my teacher because he was one of my former coaches and he came to my house to apologize for it. My dad died my senior year of high school and I missed a few weeks due to the death. Doing anything was a task, let alone school, but apparently he didn't get the notification. When I came back to class he said, "Hey Krampus, where have you been?" Who died kind of half-heartedly, and apparently I just had this sad emotionless look on my face and said my dad and left the class. He chased me down the hall and talked to me for a while, apologized over and over again, and I accepted because I knew he meant no harm at all by the ill will joke. He was nearly in tears because he coached me for a couple of years and knew my family too. He came to my house that weekend and offered to take me out and try to have some fun with his family, which his brother was my age too. I miss that teacher. He was and still is a great man with an ill-advised dark joke. Yikes, he really chose the wrong word at the wrong time. He seems like a good guy with his heart in the right place, but dang, that must have been a wake-up call for him. Hope you are doing better now, my friend. I've been an ESL teacher online for Japanese people of all ages for around 6-7 years or so. I had a favorite student, sweet nice older gentleman, loved to talk about his favorite anime shows with me to practice his English and likes to ask about what I drew during the week. I'm an illustrator. One day, he contacted me out of class hours, which was against the company's rules, and left me a message with the context of, "Hello, dear teacher. I always look forward to our classes and I have been very happy whenever we talk. I know you've become more popular and other students have requested for your classes, so we cannot talk as often as we used to. I know I am only one of the many people you teach English to, but you have been so kind to me during our classes and I feel like we have become friends. I am afraid to say that I will no longer be taking your classes anymore as I am contemplating suicide. I've been so depressed lately and I no longer know what to do." Against company protocol, I contacted him as soon as I saw the message and begged him to tell me his mailing address and told him to wait until my letter comes. I wrote him a very long letter of why he shouldn't do it and also sent a lot of my art prints and stickers to hopefully cheer him up. He responded after some weeks and said that it truly helped him clear his mind. We are still friends to this day and he sends me pictures of his pet rabbits from time to time. You saw the opportunity to bring someone back from the edge and took it. Truly amazing. Dunno if this counts as I'm the one that said it, but I had a pretty tough time at school. I had almost no friends and buried myself in my studies. My tutor was this tiny angry Welsh man called Mr. Evans, who I didn't think even noticed I existed as I just kept my head down and had no interest in either of his subjects. Flash forward 5 years and I'm working a part-time retail job whilst paying to learn accountancy at a local college. One random Sunday who walks in but Mr. Evans. He notices me, looks surprised and comes over to talk. We shoot the crap for 5 minutes or so as he basically asks me how I'm doing, what I've done since 6th form, etc. Before he goes I tell him I'm surprised he remembers me after all this time, considering all the kids that must have come and gone since then. He looks me in the eye and says, "You always remember the ones you worry about. You once spent 10 minutes in one of my lessons arguing with me about what the point of anything was in the politest way possible. It's great to see how well you're doing now. I'm glad things got better for you, man." I asked a student what she was good at. She thought for a moment with a sad face and said, "Nothing. God damn it." Then we're not doing a good enough job letting her discover her talent. "It's not hard. I'm just really tired," said to me by a little girl in tears as she refuses to do the work I gave her. I work at an international preschool in Japan and it's insane what some of these kids do before they're even in elementary school. This girl went to our school 9 to 30 every day and then had math school 2 times a week, singing class, puzzle class, yes that's a real thing here, music lessons, piano I think, and gymnastics. She was in preschool, mind you. Not me, but a friend of mine is an elementary school teacher and she came to school extremely hungover one time. It was only once and I'm sure there were reasons. She's a good, motivated and responsible teacher. One of the children smiled and hugged her, saying, "Mrs. King, you smell like my dad." "You have been visited by the skill papa," replied Jit God Papa for good skill. Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.